Welcome to Wellness and Wisdom with me, Dr. Nadu Tuakli. Here you can expect to hear conversations about everything women over 40 care about. From optimal wellness and peak performance, from intimacy to travel and finances and more. I will be speaking to interesting women and sometimes men to educate and motivate you to live your best life. If you want to find out more, please head over to my website, drtuakli.com, or subscribe to my blog. You can also read my book, Sex, Sanity, and Sleep. We are in this together. So a couple of months ago, I attended a Harvard Global Women's Empowerment Expo in Boston. I thought it sounded so cool. I would go back to my old stomping ground, meet new people, get motivated, and hear about women power and global too. Wow. As I sat through all those presentations with interesting titles like Women in Sports and Teaching STEM, to Global Girl Media and Girls Give Back and Girls Be Heard, I started to realize that the entire focus was on high school and college-age girls. There was no mention of mature women at all. So then I thought, whoa, wait a minute. What about us? Don't we need to be empowered too? Surely we still have a contribution to make to ourselves, our family, and society. We were the ones who fought for gender equality and equal pay. We were the ones who had to be militant about women's rights. Don't we need to be empowered too? Are we already being out to pasture? So I did indeed get motivated, and I decided I'm going to set a date and start my podcast. And I did meet new people, and I am on my path to women's empowerment. My guest today is Rosati, who was at the expo presenting her nonprofit project in Colombia, South America. Ma is a self-made woman. She represents the wisdom in wellness and wisdom, and she is going to share her journey with us and tell us how her life experience helps others. Ma is now living her dream life, and we're curious to know how she got there. And being the caring person that she is, she's also reaching back and helping others. She's going to show us how to navigate change gracefully, yet with purpose at any age. Ma, welcome to Wellness and Wisdom.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And thank you for coming. So, Ma, I originally met you at the Women's Empowerment Expo at Harvard, as I said. Why were you there? And how did it happen that you got there from so far away?
So I was blown away when Harvard reached out. To me, that was it was a real milestone in the life of our nascent foundation. The Proyecto Florecer has only been around since just before the pandemic, so the very beginning of 2020. So to have Harvard University reach out and invite us to participate, I decided to come up in person because one of my daughters is living in Scotland, and I have not been able to see her since before the pandemic. And I just figured it would be a lot easier to get to Scotland from Boston than it is from Medellin. So I used it as an excuse.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and major milestones?
That's a great question. I think we all pass major milestones in life. When I look back at mine, I can break my life into different segments, and how I got here was as a result of consciously leaving a different segment of my life. Rather than specifically talk about my journey so much here, I'm going to introduce your audience to an exercise I did about 5 years ago in a sisterhood circle that had a huge impact on my life in recognizing patterns in my life and recognizing my decision-making process. And it has gone a long way to inform my decisions since then. The exercise was simply drawing your life's journey and specifically focusing on the decision points, the major decision points that you had along the way. And so in some cases, it could have been, do I go to college or do I not go to college? Do I go far from home or do I stay close to home? Do I marry this guy? Do I not marry? Whatever the milestones are in life. And then the idea is to talk them through with a partner and identify what your patterns are. In my case, I found that my pattern was consistently that when I made a choice out of fear or for someone else, which in my case would be for fear of losing someone else's respect, over and over I had to go back and do a do-over. But when I made a choice out of courage, out of abundance, out of faith that the universe would provide, I continued forward on my path. So in short, without going through all the huge milestones in my life, the most recent one was leaving in 2017. I left a 23-year marriage. And that marriage, in retrospect, was a choice made out of fear rather than out of abundance. And now I'm in the process of my do-over.
And how about your careers? I think you're being a little humble. You have built 2 huge careers from scratch. And how has that taught you and to share your experience with others? What kind of experience can you share with others? What it took to build from scratch?
Well, the first career, I essentially talked my way into a marketing career and then discovered I actually had a talent for it, not just a passion for it, but a talent for it. And I was incredibly fortunate along the way to have bosses who recognized not just my talent, but what would take me years to realize was my incredible work ethic. Later in my career, when I got into management, was only then was I able to recognize that, wow, I would hire myself just because of how hard I worked. So the first career was in marketing, and then that converted into a sales career, and a very successful sales career, and then I became a sales executive. The second career that you're talking about was what I'm doing right now, which is the executive director of a nonprofit foundation in Colombia, which is some days feels light years away from my former career, and other days I realize that everything that I've done up to this point has led me to this moment.
So I was going to ask you, here you find yourself a newly divorced person in San Francisco, and how does that lead you to Colombia, to your current situation, which obviously is your passion?
Yeah, so that's, as we say, a long story. The short answer is that I had visited Colombia, and when I left the marriage, I also left the executive tech sales career at the same time. And as we all know, San Francisco is not the most cost-effective place on the planet to not be employed. So I had to go somewhere. I had to just settle for a minute and figure out what was next. And I decided to go to Colombia because when I had visited there, I felt really good in my body in Medellin. That was something that I was just learning to recognize. What does it feel good? What does it feel like to feel good in your body? In my case, it was a combination of the weather, which is spring-like all year long, so there's nothing to fight against. But there's also a sexiness to Colombia that shows up in everything. It shows up especially in the music. And so I decided I was going to learn to dance salsa. And at the same time, I would learn Spanish. And I thought that this would take me 3 months. And then in that 3 months, I would get my act together and figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Without going into more details, well, obviously that was 7 years ago or 6 years ago, and I'm still there. So that 3 months has extended. But the key takeaway to this part is that we as human beings are going to go through many iterations of change between the age of, let's say, 40 and 85. We are going to have hormones change. Yes, hopefully. Our hormones are going to change. Maybe our nest will empty. We'll go through a retirement. Maybe a partner will go through a retirement. Maybe we'll go through a separation. We'll have physical and health needs that change. What I know now that I didn't know when I started this process is that we can actually approach these changes with intentionality and grace. And the key is recognizing that we're going through a change, or we're needing to create a change. Maybe we feel misaligned in an area of my life. How do we recognize that? How do we do the work in advance? And so
And open yourself up to the change. Because
exactly, open
sometimes you
yourself
see
to like,
change coming and you're just like, no, 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 no.
no, exactly. How do we let gravity take us where we're supposed to go? And recognize that we, especially as women, are blessed with this incredible intuition that we've been taught our entire life to ignore and stay within our little boxes. So how do we tap into that wisdom that we have inherently within ourselves? And so in my journey over the last several years, I've done a lot of inner work, and some of that's been transformational workshops, deep meditation practices, ayahuasca ceremonies, sisterhood circles, therapy, you name it. I have tried it. Yoni massages. I mean, I can't think of anything that I haven't tried over the last 6 years. What I'd like to offer the audience are some journal prompts and some exercises to help identify what it is that we want and need in the moment and in our near future and in our far future. What are we feeling? What is it that we want? So I'm just going to throw a few questions out there that can be used as prompts that can be either written or meditated or discussed with a therapist. Some will resonate, some won't. Just even feel free to go back and rewind, because I'm going to go through them rather quickly in the interest of time. And in this case, I recommend that you list everyone, including people that you maybe subconsciously think you need permission from, whether it's a partner, or it could be your mother who passed away 10 years ago, or your 8-year-old self who didn't win the science fair and now thinks that she can't do something. So in this part, list everyone who you think you need permission from, and what would you do if you didn't need their permission? Next.
Great.
Question is, what brings me joy, and what does joy feel like? And if you feel called to it, where do you feel joy in your body? How do I define success for myself? What does free feel like? And what would I say if I trusted my voice?
Sounds good. So hopefully our listeners will take note of that and work on it. Those are great questions. Now, what would you say to other people who might be interested in moving to Colombia? Can you tell us a little bit about Colombia?
Yeah, I would say that as with everything, there is good and bad, and everybody's got their own tastes. It's not necessarily a place for foodies. It does have an incredibly low cost of living. It is an incredibly diverse country in terms of weather. It goes from extremely hot to extremely cold, and I've picked the baby bear of the weather patterns, where it's just right all the time. For those of us who know the World Bank's Gini coefficient, Colombia is ranked number 7 in the world for income disparity. So there is a lot of visible poverty. And that's one of the reasons why I got involved in the work that I did. There are also, in one of the things that I've learned in my travels in general is that, as a rule, the people who live most humbly are the most generous in spirit and the most joyful. Absolutely. I would also say that for women, the dating scene is not it's not a reason why women should go to Colombia necessarily.
Is there something about Medellin that's better than the other parts of Colombia, or you just happen to settle there?
I stay away from the word better because that's personal judgment. For me, yes, there are things that are better than other places there. Number one, I come back to the weather. It has the nickname the City of Eternal Spring, and it is a well-deserved nickname. There is a very active expat community there. Any activity that I want, I can find a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group, from board games to yoga to bachata dancing to everything in between. So my social life has never been more active. Now that I'm fluent in Spanish, my social network includes locals and expats. It's also essentially the Silicon Valley, or the Austin of South America. It is renowned for its innovation. the only city in Colombia that has a metro, and it also has a wide variety of other resources, free resources for citizens, including a parks and recreation department like nothing I've ever seen before.
And how is the healthcare system? Is it mostly private?
So it differs. I have had the fortunate or otherwise experience of experiencing the healthcare system in my city, Medellin, as well as in rural areas. And there's quite a disparity in the quality. The health insurance, now that I am there on a visa and I'm a resident, I have access to their health insurance, which is spectacular. The healthcare in Medellin is unequaled to anything I've ever seen in the world. From a cost perspective, but also a service perspective, my doctors WhatsApp me on Sunday morning asking me how I feel.
Sounds which is like something
me. Something I've never experienced before in my life. So incredibly high quality, good prices. Us foreigners, I would say incredibly accessible. Not as much for the locals who cannot afford private insurance.
So there isn't a national insurance that's free for everyone?
There is a national insurance that I and everyone else pay into. It's not free, but it is low cost, and it provides basic insurance.
And so the regular folks buy into that as well?
Correct.
So while we're talking about costs, I'm assuming that your financial acumen has allowed you to be independent.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate in that my first jobs were for boutique wealth management company. There were two of them in a row. And I learned the foundations of investing when I was 19 years old. Very lucky, because this is stuff that like my parents didn't teach me. I never learned it in school. I absolutely had to do trial and error along the way. But what I learned, more important than anything else, two rules that I recommend for everyone is pay yourself first and start early, because your returns will compound over time, and do not touch it in a downturn. Let it ride.
So what are your new challenges, and how do you see your life going from here? How do you see things evolving?
So I'm in one of those phases of change. I think it's at its very nascent stage. It's something that I feel coming, like maybe in 10 years from now, I'll say, oh yeah, that's what I was feeling 10 years ago. Now, as the executive director of a foundation, I feel like I'm still learning the ropes on how to do well what I'm charged with doing. But I see the gravity pulling me towards being on boards, whether they're for nonprofits or for-profit companies, continuing leading workshops and sisterhood circles for personal growth. And my goal, my dream is to lead either men's circles or at least mixed gender circles.
So would you like to tell us more about your nonprofit? You'll have to say the name properly for me. I think it's Proyecto Florecer.
Well done. Yes, we call it. We do a little bit of the Colombian accent with the Proyecto Florecer. We work primarily with, we call them vulnerable populations, mostly single mothers. About half of our group are also Venezuelan refugees. We have other marginalized populations as part of our group as well. We focus on women, and we have had some men in the group, and we welcome them. And we are launching this year programs for teenagers. And what we do with the women, we run a community kitchen in a very difficult neighborhood in Medellin. And I say difficult because these women are raising their children in this neighborhood, not because they want to, but because of economic reasons. And the challenge is that it is a neighborhood where you go to get any vice that you're looking for. So drugs are being sold on every corner, and it's a very viable career path for young people. And the women come to us because they are looking to avoid that future for themselves and their families. So they come and they work in the community kitchen, and what they get in return is education programs. We offer workshops every time we run the community kitchen, and the themes are professional development, health and well-being, and personal growth. We also offer programs for the teenagers and for the mothers in vocational training. So we're already offering cooking and sewing. We're going to branch out and also offer plumbing and carpentry. And then for the young folks, we are launching a program called Emprendimiento, which is STEM-based training in the theme emprendimiento, which is the Spanish word for entrepreneurship. And where we see that leading is two places. One is we intend to launch a micro-lending program for self-starter entrepreneurs with good business plans. But also more sustainable, as we see it, is the work that we're doing with our corporate partners, where they are offering the volunteers to do the training programs for the kids. And as part of a circular economy, they are building their workforce of the future. And our intention and our hope is that 10 years from now, the cream of the crop of the kids that are going through our programs today are going to be offered scholarships and internships and work opportunities at our corporate partners.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you are funded.
Wings and prayers. How do we keep the doors open? Yes, we are mostly funded through the generosity of friends and family who believe in the work that we do. We have a handful of small corporate sponsorships. We've recently launched a relationship with a Canadian company that's opened a social enterprise, support Colombian nonprofit organizations, and they have selected us as their beneficiary. And we will be selling custom-made shoes, tennis shoes for mothers and children, starting in the Colombian market and then branching out to the North American market. We also have our own series. We believe in self-sustainability. We don't do handouts for the women that we serve, and we love taking donations, but we don't want to live on donations and survive on donations forever. So we're launching our own series of entrepreneurial programs, starting with a recycling program. We run clothing bazaars. We do artisan fairs. We have a series of entrepreneurial ideas that we'd like to get to the point where, right now, our only employees, and I'm using air quotes for employees, are my co-founder and I. And I use air quotes because we're unpaid, but we're the only employees. The rest is run by volunteers. So we don't have anybody on staff. Once we have a staff in place, we can start branching out to do some of the other entrepreneurial ideas we have, like food prep service. We've got these highly skilled cooks that we're working with in the kitchen. These women need employment. We can start a business around that. We could also start business like an employment agency for these women are experts in cleaning homes. So there are things that we can do as an organization for our own self-sustainability. We're just not there yet in terms of having a strong foundation underneath us.
So what would you consider your biggest success so far related to the nonprofit?
It sounds trite, but the fact that the women come back. Mm-hmm. They come back, they bring their friends, and now their daughters want to participate. That, to me, is the greatest validation that I could possibly ask for.
And that's great, because you are a relatively new nonprofit, and so you don't have that much history. So it's really nice that you have some generational effect.
It's a beautiful thing watching the mothers and the daughters interact especially when we're doing the personal growth workshops. We actually, you can almost see physically connection being forged between the generations.
And when you do include men in your program, do you have any ideas about what you want them to do? Because it sounds to me like they could get a career being security guards in that area that you talked about.
Well, ironically enough, it is one of the most secure neighborhoods in the city, because let's say the resident population who work in their field do not let anything bad happen in that neighborhood. They do not let anything happen that would attract police presence. We in particular are very well cared for on our street. We are well known, and we are incredibly well cared for by the people who, not just the people involved in the vice trade, but the shopkeepers and the residents who come to us for the free meals. They go out of their way to make sure that we feel safe, that we feel welcome. It's lovely. But to answer your question specifically about the men, it is a real neighborhood, yes, and it is a neighborhood full of beautiful people. We feel really blessed every time that we engage with the local people there. When we have men in the group, we like to focus on, the health and well-being and the professional development. Those themes don't necessarily change when men are involved. But from a personal growth perspective, we love to do a lot of gender roles discussions. We talk about how physically, biologically, emotionally, men and women are built differently and how we do things differently, not necessarily one better than the other, just equal but different. We have a lot of conversations around that subject. We also talk about the protective nature of men and how we women tend to, often for good reason, have defensiveness around men. And we foster conversations about how we can balance this, about how we can tap into our feminine energy by trusting the men around us, and how do we trust the men around us by tapping into our intuition of choosing well the men around us, and how do we recognize when a relationship is toxic, and how do we avoid it, and how do we exit it. And so these are typical topics of conversations when we have men involved.
And how do the men feel about having their female family members and wives participate in your program? Do you get any pushback?
I have not heard any pushback. We have family events on occasion, and the men come, and they are grateful for the changes they've seen in their women. The men that are consistent partners of the women that we work with. Many of the women we work with are single. Some of them have consistent partners, and we find them to be very supportive in emotionally and also like physically bringing them to the location, picking them up. Yeah, we haven't heard pushback, and that could possibly be that there are women that we have lost from the group, meaning that they've stopped coming and they don't necessarily tell us their reasons. If it's work related, we tend to know that. There have been several that we have lost because they've picked up work on the days that we run the foundation. And for us, that's a fabulous reason to lose one of our members. In general, I would say that the men are quite supportive.
So what would you consider your biggest success so far in life generally?
That's such a big question.
I know, it's about life.
It is. It's a beautiful question. I think courage. I think learning courage is what I would call my biggest success. And it shows up in relationships. It shows up in the foundation. It shows up in moving to a foreign country. And courage to me means doing it even though I don't know how. Doing it even though I'm scared of it. Self-compassion for my failures. And getting up and trying again. I have developed a really beautiful relationship with my fear in the last several years. Fear is something that I spent a lifetime trying to avoid or pretending I didn't have. And now I have a true gratitude for my fear, because without it, I could never exhibit courage.
Oh, well, I love that. That is a great lesson to teach others. To be fair to you, I know you have a lot of courage because I know you ran away as a teenager from home all the way across New York to California at a tender age. That
Yes.
takes courage.
It did take
And
courage.
yeah,
Yes.
and the knowledge that you might fall flat on your face, but you did it anyway.
Yeah, I would say, okay, so now that you've brought that up, not ending up a prostitute or a drug addict might be considered my greatest success in life based on that start, honestly, because statistically, that could very well have been an outcome.
Well, that was your greatest success for that phase of your life.
Exactly.
But it wasn't the greatest success of your entire life. You're not defined by not having become a prostitute.
Well, in a way, you're right. So I would absolutely agree with that. And it has formed the path of my life in a positive way.
So, do you have any parting words to share with our listeners?
You asked me in one of our conversations about mentorship, and mentorship is really important to me. And especially now that we've brought up this, this traumatic early life experience, there's no way that I could have become the woman that I've become today without the support and mentorship of others. And that actually drives my why I'm involved in the nonprofit. Mentorship to me is critical. And I'd like to bring up a couple of people in my life that have really embodied mentorship to me. One of my first mentors was Catherine, who I was 19 and she was twice my age and she didn't have children, and she took me under her wing. And I think of it in terms of, like, I call it my pretty woman moments, where she and her husband took me to the ballet and took me to restaurants and introduced me to culture that I never would have had access to otherwise. Gently corrected me when I used the wrong fork at the fancy restaurant. And I'm so grateful for her mentorship and the way she did it in such a gentle and loving way. A different kind of mentor was Bob. From Bob, I learned to answer all the questions that Bob, instead of going to Bob with my great idea, I got to learn how to answer all the hard questions first. The questions that Bob was going to ask me, that was going to make me feel dumb when I didn't know the answers. That has really led to a lot of career success in thinking through possibilities and challenges, and not necessarily not doing something because of them. Just knowing that they're going to be there and how can I potentially avoid pitfalls in advance. And so I'm grateful for, yeah, exactly. The third person that I would like to bring up is my co-founder, Erin. Proyecto Florecer was actually her idea. She is also a U.S. citizen who went to Colombia 7 years ago to be a school teacher. She is 25 years younger than me. She says I mentor her, but I learn from her every day. And so we have a beautiful intergenerational wisdom sharing relationship in Proyecto Florecer behind the scenes, not just what we do with the women and the children, but she and I behind the scenes have a beautiful cross-mentoring relationship that I'm just terribly grateful for.
Great. So thank you so much for coming on, Ma. And I do wish you all the best with your Proyecto Florecer, your nonprofit. And if people are interested in learning more about your nonprofit, how can they find out more information?
They can find us on all the social media channels. On Instagram, it's proyecto.florecer. It's proyecto.florecer. Same thing on Facebook, and we're at proyectoflorecer.org on
Perfect.
our website.
And I wish you all the best and lots of luck. And I'm sure 5 years from now, we'll be talking again to see what happened with the project and the next generation that you're helping.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for choosing me to be on this episode. I hope I've added value to your listeners. Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming on. All right. Take care. Thank you for listening to Wellness and Wisdom with me, Dr. Nadu Tuakli. You have just heard Mar Rosati talking about her project in Colombia, South America, and her amazing life story from being a runaway teen to a highfalutin business executive, and then leaving that and starting all over in Colombia. Remember, it's not so much about an individual story because everyone's path is different. But the question is how others can learn from your experience. And Mar mentioned a lot of ways in which you can help other people by being a mentor, joining sister circles, and giving intergenerational wisdom and sharing what you have learned so that others coming behind you can benefit from that wisdom. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please click on the follow button on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with a friend. Thanks for listening. You can head over to drtuakli.com or subscribe to my blog or the YouTube channel for more information. Wishing you the best of health and happiness. We're in this together. Until next time, this is Dr. Tuakli signing off. Bye.